Welcome this afternoon to the 2016 E.H. Gombrich Memorial Lecture. Joseph Koerner is one of the most distinguished art historians of our time. It was a coup of my predecessor Peter Mack to have secured him to give the E.H. Gombrich lectures this year. But it was our blessing and my particular pleasure that Professor Koerner had to postpone his lecture till this year, 2016, which, as you know, is the 150th anniversary of the birth of A.B. Warburg. This is an auspicious combination of names to conjure with: Warburg, Gombrich, Koerner. I'm going to return in a moment to unpacking this trio of names and see if we can see any alliances or polarities, a favorite word of A.B. Warburg's, in this combination. It's customary on such occasions, it's habit on such occasions to say that, oh, the lecturer's list of distinctions is too great to repeat, and it couldn't be more true than on this occasion. But I do think, seeing that the Warburg Institute is trying to be at the forefront of the engine of a new art history, that we may just want to review some of Professor Koerner's publications. I will certainly not tell you about all the prizes he won, or the articles he's written, or the distinguished societies of which he's been a member, or the distinguished professorships which he's held. These are the sorts of things which we expect all E.H. Gombrich lecturers to have held. But none could match the books. In fact, the books begin 5 years before he completed his doctorate. We have doctoral students over here who are very worried about their futures. They're worried about completing, doctoral students everywhere worrying about completing their dissertations. Here, of course, in Britain, we no longer have the luxury of lengthy doctorates. But I think it's pretty much a record that someone who started off an academic career should have written a book called Die Suche nach dem Labyrinth, der Mythos von Daedalus und Ikarus. So actually, I just discovered he didn't write it in German, although he checked on the translation. He wrote it in English, but the Germans, being so erudite, wished to have it translated immediately, and you will gather from that, not surprisingly, that he began his long wanderings through the labyrinth of art history with an account of the Daedalus and Icarus story. I don't think Joseph has ever flown too close to the sun and suffered the consequences of doing that, because though the ambition has always been there, he has always had his senses firmly aware of the ground below. No crashes for Koerner. That was a remarkable book dealing with the central myth of Western art. And then he changed his approach entirely with the next book, which came out just a couple of years after his doctorate. Wonderful book on a painter who until then had been largely considered in what people would regard as a kind of typical Warburgian way, mistakenly. In other words, it was a book about Caspar David Friedrich, about whom Warburg never said anything, but the approach to Caspar David Friedrich until Koerner arrived on the scene was largely iconographic in the most old-fashioned Panofskian way. You found your motifs and you identified their symbolic content and so on and so forth. And Koerner went in an entirely different direction. He talked about the phenomenological aspects of the work of Koerner, the phenomenological aspects of the work of Friedrich, and the ways in which the presence of the beholder in the work played a key role in the constitution of the work of art. But Koerner had always been interested in earlier German art, in a way perhaps that might have interested Warburg, but in a way probably that would have repelled Gombrich. He began with the work of that very odd, or he didn't begin, but he made some striking early statements about the work of that odd painter, Hans Baldung Green, so involved apparently with witchcraft, so concerned with representations of male and female body, sexuality heavily present in it. And from that, so Koerner was moved then to ask about the status of the work of art in the run-up to the Reformation in Germany. Needless to say, of course, he worked very much in that period on Dürer, and in 1993 there came out a book which was really a signal achievement in the history of art, a kind of milestone in the history of art, The Moment of Self-Portraiture in German Renaissance Art. This was a book which considered the changed status of self-portraiture wrought by Dürer and the consequent changed status of painting itself in the light of viewers and contemporary viewers as well, awareness or sensibilities about the independence of the work of art from its roots in religion, from its roots in superstitious practices, and so on. It was an amazing book, beautifully written book, a work which everyone who wants to know how to write engaging, captivating art history, responsibly grounded in the history of culture, should read. In a way, it took Koerner quite a long time to come to the, I don't know whether we can call them the conclusions of this work, but certainly to provide a summa of his position on the relationship between the autonomy of the work of art and the cultural conditioning of the Reformation in the great book called The Reformation of the Image, which seems to me so standard now that I can hardly believe my eyes when I see it already appeared in 2004. Is that correct? So it's now almost an antique. It's certainly an antique by modern scientific standards. He worked more on Dürer, and I see from the notes before me that he has a book called Bosch and Bruegel, From Enemy Painting to Everyday Life. So I can't speak for that, but we are really looking forward to seeing what it contains. I'm wondering whether he is going to engage with the German theorist who had his flourishing in the course of the run-up to the Second World War, Carl Schmitt, who is so engaged contemporary theorists of politics, and I know Joseph is very interested in him as well. But it's not only the books that have come from Koerner, it's his teaching and his exhibitions. I mean, he's always taught early Netherlandish painting, he's taught German Renaissance art, he's done exhibitions on Netherlandish prints, he has even curated a retrospective of the work of his father, the Austrian painter Henry Koerner, which has led him to many moving reflections on the relationship between art and the Holocaust. I don't think he's going to speak about that today. He's produced several BBC series, Northern Renaissance, three-part series on the Northern Renaissance, and then in 2007 a feature-length documentary on Vienna, which is called City of Dreams. In fact, I find that he is now currently writing, directing, and producing a documentary film on the Viennese interior. And in the notes to this film, he says it's got the working title, The Burning Child, and explores through interviews and other visual explorations the dream and nightmare of homemaking. I don't know whether I am right or wrong, but I think that I see from the numbers of applications we receive, I see from the number of projects by humanists across the globe, that homemaking seems to be becoming a kind of shibboleth for the examination of all kinds of cultural conflict. I could stand here and list three other distinguished scholars who are looking at this broad topic of homemaking. So you heard it here first at the Warburg Institute, although Joseph has thought of it already. So this is a powerful intelligence who will speak to us today, a man who has ranged enormously widely across the whole history of art. He's collaborated with some of the most distinguished scholars of our times, both inside the history of art and outside the history of art, as you will discover on Thursday. In Thursday's lecture, he's engaged much with contemporary art, has done extraordinary work and is doing extraordinary work on the work of William Kentridge, one of those artists, the greatest figurative artist, I would say, of today, a compelling artist to raise all kinds of questions about enemy painting, I would say. So we look forward with enthusiasm to Joseph's presentation. So I'm now just briefly want to come back to Koerner, Warburg, and Gombrich. so here are some things for you perhaps to think about as Joseph takes the lectern. Where do we place Koerner in this trio? I don't think Gombrich started his career, or much of his career was passed as a sophisticated iconographer over here. I think iconography does not lie at the forefront of Koerner's concerns. Psychological and phenomenological issues lay somewhere at the side of Gombrich's concerns. They appeared in Art and Illusion. You remember it was a study in the psychology of visual representation, but it was a more positivist, less philosophically inclined psychology than I think Koerner is interested. Koerner's psychology, which is there, is very rooted in the theory of the arts, in the contemporary theory of the arts. He's a man who has a vast knowledge and awareness of the ways in which literary theory also passes across to the theory of the history of art. But in a way, Gombrich, as we all know, remained quite positivist. I think Koerner is more imaginative, closer in some ways, much closer in some ways to A.B. Warburg. Koerner, like Warburg, knows how to include the role of emotion, the body, in the understanding of the work of art. He's also aware of the ways in which cultural patterns are projected across and transformed across time and space through complex processes of memory. He reflects on these questions. But I don't think either of them thought as hard about Koerner, about what a work of art means as a work of art. Neither of them were that concerned about what constitutes the aesthetic aspects of a painting, a print, and so on. So I think this is one area which Koerner really has something to bring to the traditional preoccupations of the Warburg Institute. We look forward to see how this plays out in these lectures, but I notice I asked for this to come up and I need to stop here. He has here, the title for these 3 lectures are The Evidence of Images, 1, Bosch, 2, Max Beckmann. I don't think he's been spoken much of. That will be another contribution. He hasn't been spoken much of in this building. 3, Kentridge, who has not been spoken about at all, except maybe in a sentence by me in this building. So that in itself is a new. But the evidence of image is in itself something interesting and something that stands at the borderline of German and Anglo-Saxon thought. I was part of a project at the Freie Universität in Berlin for several years, with which I think Joseph probably also was associated, called Bildevidenz. And we had wonderful periods of complete misunderstanding, cultural misunderstanding, blankness, because of course when we think about evidence, we think about legal evidence. What evidence does the image provide for a state of affairs, for a state of exception, shall we say? What is the evidence provided? What facts say yea or nay? When Germans talk about evidence, they mean something pretty different. It's not just the juristic use of evidence, but it has something to do with the weight of the appearance of the image, the ability to convey something through its imageness, through its visual content. So I think what we are looking forward to today, Joseph, I may have raised expectations beyond your particular aims today, but we will look in his lecture for the ways in which Koerner today brings something new to the thought of A.B. Warburg, Ernst Gombrich, and even the most current things going on in Berlin. If Joseph can lead the way to a new and revived Warburg Institute which freshens scholarship in the humanities, we will always be grateful to him. Welcome, Joseph Koerner.